On Christmas Eve, they shut her out. Family, strangers, even the glittering ballroom that treated her like she didn't belong. But what no one expected was that the same girl they rejected in front of the world would become the one choice a powerful millionaire couldn't ignore. And by the time the night was over, their laughter would turn into silence. Stay with us, because what begins as rejection ends in recognition. Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever been pushed aside on the night you needed love most, only to rise where no one expected you? On Christmas Eve, Chicago gleamed like a jewel box cracked open, spilling light and laughter onto the icy streets. But for Nia Carter, the glow belonged to someone else's world. She walked through the cold in a thrift store coat that had given up its warmth long before this winter, its sleeves frayed, its buttons clinging by thread. Her breath curled white against the night air, rising like smoke from a fire that struggled to stay alive. In her hands she cradled a paper cup of cocoa, the cardboard damp from melting snow, the taste of sugar too thin to mask the weight pressing in her chest. At 26, she should have been inside somewhere, leaning against a crowded kitchen counter, laughing with cousins, or slipping another ornament onto a family tree. But her name had long been erased from the guest lists of her own blood. Her mother's voice still haunted her. Dreams don't pay bills, Nia. Grow up. Her siblings had been harsher, mocking her sketches, calling her the starving artist, while they flaunted steady jobs and stable paychecks. The last time she'd knocked on her mother's door, she had heard laughter inside, the kind that meant family gathered around a feast. But the door never opened. That night, she'd walked away and promised herself she wouldn't beg again. So tonight, while other families carved turkeys and unwrapped secrets hidden under glittering paper, Nia's feast was a lukewarm drink on a frozen sidewalk. The city moved on without her. Couples hurried past with shopping bags, children tugged at mittened hands, taxis honked impatiently in the snow. She was invisible in all of it, another shadow among the glittering displays, another stranger pressed up against glass that separated want from abundance, and yet, beneath the ache, a stubborn fire still lived. She refused to believe this was all she was destined for. She sketched between catering shifts, drew patterns and designs in the margins of menus, dreamed of fabric that could turn silence into song. Her hands were cracked from cold, but her vision was unbroken. One day, she told herself, the world would know her not as the girl her family rejected, but as the woman who built something that no one could take away. The snow thickened, dusting her lashes, turning the city into a stage set for belonging. And still she walked, slow and steady, carrying rejection like armor. What she didn't know, as she whispered a prayer into the midnight sky, was that her story was already colliding with another, a man of glass towers and steel fortunes, a man whose emptiness mirrored her own. The girl with no place at the table was about to find herself seated where no one expected her to be.
Across town, the Carter Financial Tower pierced the night sky, its glass facade glowing against the snowfall like a beacon of power. Inside the penthouse ballroom, warmth radiated from crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering light across velvet drapes and polished marble floors. Waiters in pressed uniforms floated silently between tables, pouring champagne that bubbled like liquid gold. The Reynolds family had perfected the ritual of spectacle, a Christmas gala where wealth was both celebrated and displayed, an unspoken contest of who could shine brightest. At the center of it all stood Alexander Reynolds. At 43, he carried himself with the easy gravity of a man accustomed to command, his presence both magnetic and unnerving. His face bore the lines of victories won in boardrooms, his jaw carved by discipline, his eyes a shade of blue so sharp they seemed to slice through any pretense. silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, giving him a dignified edge that cameras loved. Tonight he wore a tailored navy suit cut to precision, the kind of clothing that whispered old money even though his fortune was entirely self-made. Guests approached him in waves, politicians with fixed smiles, heirs eager to impress, socialites shimmering in sequins. Each greeted him as though his approval were currency, waiting for the curve of his mouth or the flicker of his gaze to measure their worth. He nodded, shook hands, accepted compliments about the skyline view from his penthouse balcony, yet none of it lingered. To Alexander, it was all noise. The truth was simpler and lonelier. Behind the facade of grandeur and carefully curated elegance, a quiet ache hollowed his chest. He had built empires of steel and glass, each tower bearing his name, each acquisition proof of his brilliance. But none of it silenced the echo waiting in the moments between applause. When the gala ended and the lights dimmed, he would return to silence, to a home with no laughter of children, no warmth of a partner who knew him beyond the headlines. Wealth had given him everything except the one thing it could never buy: belonging. Tonight would be no different. He would play the role, charm the room, and lift a glass to toast the season. Yet as he looked out over the glittering sea of guests, his gaze hardened, searching for something he couldn't yet name. Somewhere beyond the walls of glass and steel, in the same city wrapped in snow, another soul carried the same weight of loneliness. Their worlds were about to collide, though neither knew it yet. Nia arrived at the tower with her coat buttoned high, the wind nipping at her cheeks as she followed the catering crew through a narrow service door tucked at the side of the building. The grandeur of the lobby was for the guests. The staff came in through corridors that smelled faintly of bleach and overcooked coffee. She signed her name on a clipboard, slipped on a crisp white apron, and tied her curls back into a neat bun. The uniform was meant to erase her, to make her blend into a quiet army of servers who glided unseen through ballrooms of power. She had learned long ago how to fold her shoulders and her voice small enough to pass unnoticed. When she stepped into the grand ballroom, the air itself seemed different, thick with perfume, laughter, and the soft notes of a live string quartet. Light poured down from chandeliers that resembled frozen constellations, scattering across velvet curtains and mirrored walls. Nia took in the sight with quiet awe, but no one noticed her eyes. To the guests, she was another shadow moving trays of champagne, her presence acknowledged only when a glass was set down or a spill was avoided. She wove carefully between tables where men in tailored suits boasted about mergers, and women in gowns glittering with sequins leaned in for photographs. Conversations hushed when Alexander Reynolds passed, but no one hushed for her. At one table she brushed against the sleeve of a man reaching for his drink. His face snapped toward her with a sneer, sharp and immediate. "Watch where you're going. People like you are always out of place here." His words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed with the weight of truth spoken from entitlement. Nia murmured an apology. Her eyes lowered and carried on. The sting was familiar. The casual cruelty as sharp as the December air outside. She thought of Christmases past, standing at the edges of family gatherings where she had been tolerated but never welcomed, her chair always a folding one pulled in at the last minute, her voice drowned beneath louder, prouder siblings. Here in the glittering heart of Chicago's elite, Nothing had changed. She was still the girl outside the glass, serving warmth she was never invited to share. Yet beneath the humiliation, she steadied herself. Her hands moved with practiced grace, her posture straight, her pride tucked away but unbroken. She reminded herself that invisibility had its own kind of power, because sometimes the ones no one saw were the very ones destined to change everything. The music swelled as the ballroom filled to its peak, strings and laughter weaving together beneath the golden chandeliers. Nia balanced a silver tray against her palm, her steps measured, her smile faint but steady. She moved with the ease of someone who had learned to be invisible, until the moment Vanessa Caldwell decided to make her scene. Vanessa glided across the marble floor like a queen surveying her court, her red satin gown catching every flicker of light, diamonds at her throat glittering like ice. Her smile never reached her eyes. As Nia approached with her tray, Vanessa shifted deliberately, her manicured hand grazing the stem of a glass and sending it tipping forward. Champagne spilled in a golden arc before crashing down across Nia's blouse and apron. The cold fizz soaked through the fabric instantly, dripping to the polished floor. Gasps rippled from nearby tables, but Vanessa's laugh sliced through louder, sharp and cruel. "Honestly," she drawled, her voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding guests, "you should be grateful we even let you in here." Nia froze, the sting of humiliation rising hotter than the champagne soaking her chest. Every eye seemed to fall on her at once, some curious, some amused, others carefully averted as if politeness meant pretending nothing had happened. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but her body betrayed her stillness. For a heartbeat too long, she stood there, her tray trembling in her grip. Vanessa tilted her head, watching for cracks in Nia's composure. "Do they hire just anyone these days?" she added, her words coated in mockery. A few guests chuckled softly, the kind of laughter meant to appease the powerful, to signal alignment with cruelty. Others glanced down at their plates, unwilling to intervene. One woman even raised her phone, tilting it discreetly to record. Nia lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll clean this up right away, ma'am." Her words were polite, restrained, but her dignity burned beneath them like iron. She stooped slightly to dab at the spill, not because she accepted Vanessa's cruelty, but because she refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing her break. But humiliation has a way of echoing louder than any orchestra. The laughter, the whispers, the silence of those who looked away, it pressed in on her chest until she thought she might choke. And yet, above the murmurs of the crowd, a different kind of silence settled. On the balcony, a man with silver at his temples and eyes sharp as winter watched the scene unfold. His glass of champagne remained untouched in his hand, his gaze fixed not on Vanessa's triumph, but on the quiet strength of the woman she tried to shatter. Alexander Reynolds had spent a lifetime studying the masks people wore. He could read the twitch of an eye across a negotiation table, the forced laugh of a man drowning in debt, the brittle charm of a woman desperate to stay relevant. But tonight, in the middle of a ballroom thick with money and ambition, it wasn't the polished faces that caught him. It was the quiet defiance of a young woman standing drenched in champagne, her back straight, her eyes lowered not in shame but in restraint. Nia Carter, though he did not yet know her name, carried more truth in that stillness than any of the sycophants orbiting his empire. From the balcony above, he watched the scene unfold. Vanessa Caldwell, preening like cruelty was her crown. Guests shifting uncomfortably, phones raised in secret. He felt the room tilt, the balance of power bending toward something that demanded to be corrected. He set his untouched glass aside and moved, each step down the staircase pulling the air tighter, quieter. Conversations dimmed as people noticed him, like a tide retreating before a storm. By the time his shoes struck the marble, silence had gathered in his wake. Vanessa turned first, her smirk blooming as if she'd been waiting for his intervention, certain it would fall in her favor. "Mr. Reynolds," she purred, her voice rich with false sweetness. Do you know who you're laughing at?" His words cut clean, no louder than before, but edged with steel. The question stilled her tongue, her practiced composure faltering under the weight of his gaze. She recovered quickly, tilting her chin, assuming charm could shield her. "A clumsy girl who—" Alexander didn't let her finish. "That young woman," he said, his voice even deliberate, "has more grace in her silence than you have in your fortune." A ripple surged through the ballroom. Guests shifted in their chairs, glancing between Vanessa's painted indignation and Nia's stunned stillness. Vanessa's lips parted as if to argue, but the room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the man who commanded empires and the girl who had just, without a word, unmasked them all. Nia's breath caught, her tray still trembling faintly in her grip. She dared a glance upward, and for the first time her eyes met his. Alexander's gaze was steady, unflinching, and in it she saw something rare. Recognition, not of her uniform, not of her mistake, but of her worth. A wave of whispers rippled through the ballroom as Alexander moved forward, each step measured, deliberate, the crowd parting without a word. Eyes followed him as if tethered, the kind of silence that falls when everyone senses they are about to witness something they will remember. Nia stood frozen, the weight of champagne still heavy on her blouse, her tray clutched against her chest like a shield. When he stopped beside her, the air thickened. She lifted her gaze hesitantly at first, then fully. And for the first time she looked into his eyes. They were piercing, steady, unflinching. What she saw there made her pulse stutter. Not pity, not condescension, but recognition. Vanessa's laugh broke the silence, brittle and defiant. "Alexander, surely you can't be serious." She ruined the ...
"Leave," he said simply, his voice calm but immovable. The word carried more weight than a shout could have, and it landed like a stone in still water. Vanessa faltered, searching the room for allies, but none came. The guests shifted in their chairs, murmurs rising, some nodding, others hiding smiles behind champagne flutes. Her protest dissolved into silence, drowned by the approval gathering in the crowd. Red-faced, she turned sharply, her gown sweeping the floor as she stormed toward the exit, diamonds clinking against her throat like shackles. Alexander let the moment settle before he turned back to the room, his voice carrying easily without force. "You look at her and see someone disposable," he said, gesturing lightly toward Nia, who stood still as marble beside him. "I look at her and see the only kind of strength money can't buy." His words sliced through the glittering air, leaving no room for misunderstanding. A hush fell deeper than before, the crowd absorbing the declaration like scripture. Phones hovered in trembling hands, capturing every word, every flicker of expression. Nia's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to step back, to vanish into the service doors and escape the sudden spotlight, but then she saw his hand extend, not toward the exit, not to usher her away, but upward, an invitation not to hide, but to rise. Her fingers hesitated before they reached for his, her hand trembling as he closed his around it. He led her forward, not as a server, but as an equal, guiding her toward the stage at the front of the ballroom. As she stepped up beside him, the chandeliers seemed to burn brighter, the music fading into memory. For the first time all evening, Nia did not feel invisible. She felt seen. By the time dawn broke, the snow on Chicago's streets was trampled and gray, but the city pulsed with a new story. Clips from the gala had spread faster than the winter storm, phones buzzing through the night with a single refrain. Millionaire defends waitress on Christmas gala. Headlines blazed across every platform, the grainy footage looping endlessly. Vanessa's smirk, the cascade of champagne, Nia's frozen dignity, and then Alexander's voice cutting through the ballroom like a blade. That young woman has more grace in her silence than you have in your fortune. Those words replayed with the rhythm of revelation, shared, commented, dissected, until the story became larger than the room where it was born. Brands moved quickly, as they always did when the tide turned. Vanessa's sponsors released careful statements about values that matter. Invitations once flooding her inbox grew scarce. By mid-morning, her name trended not with admiration, but with disdain. She had tried to humiliate someone she believed beneath her, and in doing so had revealed the hollowness of her own world. Her influence, polished and packaged for years, cracked and crumbled overnight. Nia watched none of it. In her tiny rented room, the radiator hissed against the cold as she hung her soaked uniform to dry. She sat on the edge of her bed, her sketchbook open on her lap, her heart hammering in disbelief. The world was watching her, but she felt the same, tired, uncertain, and somehow smaller under the weight of so much attention. She didn't want to be a headline. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted only to keep moving, one step at a time, toward the dream that had carried her through rejection. The phone rang just after noon, its vibration rattling against the chipped nightstand. She almost didn't answer, thinking it a wrong number, but when she pressed the receiver to her ear, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Deep, measured, familiar now in a way that startled her. Alexander Reynolds. "I saw your sketches," he said without preamble, as though he had been holding the words since the night before. "You don't need charity, Miss Carter. You need a partner." Her breath caught, her pencil stilled above the page. For years, she had fought to keep the dream alive with scraps of paper and stolen minutes. Now, on the morning after the loneliest Christmas of her life, the man who had seen her when no one else would was offering not salvation, but belief. A year had passed, and the air carried the same December chill. But for Nia Carter, everything had changed. She pushed open the glass doors of her studio, the bell above them chiming softly, and stepped into a space that once existed only in the margins of her sketchbook. The walls were alive with color, lined with framed designs that bore her signature at the bottom, each stroke of pencil turned into fabric, each idea stitched into reality. Bolts of cloth leaned against one wall, sunlight spilling across them in shades of emerald, gold, and crimson. It smelled of fresh paper, of possibility, of beginnings. Alexander Reynolds walked in behind her, his presence filling the room but never overshadowing her. He looked different here, not like the towering figure of empire she had first glimpsed from the corner of a ballroom, but like something steadier, quieter. An ally. He had given her capital, yes, but more than that. He had given her the one thing she had never been granted before: belief. He moved his gaze across the room, then back to her. and for a fleeting moment his smile carried something unspoken, something only she could read. That Christmas, the gala returned, as it always did, all glitter and spectacle. But this time, Nia entered through the front doors. She wore a gown of her own making, fabric draping like liquid midnight. Her head high as cameras flashed. The chandeliers sparkled, the same strings played, but the energy bent differently now. Guests who once brushed past her now turned their heads, clapping as she crossed the floor. Politicians, investors, socialites, the same faces who had seen her as invisible a year before, now applauded as if she had been part of their circle all along. She knew the truth. Applause was fleeting. But the work she had carved out of rejection was permanent. Later, when the music softened and the crowd thinned, she found herself by the window with Alexander. Snow drifted past the glass, the city below wrapped in silver light. For a while they said nothing, watching flakes dissolve against the warm glow of the tower. Then he leaned closer, his voice low, his words meant only for her. When everyone else rejected you, I saw my only choice. Because real wealth isn't in what you own. It's in who you stand beside. Nia's chest tightened, not with disbelief this time, but with a quiet certainty. She had been the girl with no place at the table, the one overlooked, dismissed, humiliated. Now she was here, not because she had been chosen by wealth, but because she had chosen herself first. The snow fell heavier, softening the city into silence, and Nia stood tall, her story no longer a secret. She was no longer invisible. She was exactly where she was meant to be. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there has felt like Nia, shut out, humiliated, and told they didn't belong, only to rise in a way no one expected. Comment below if you've ever turned rejection into your moment of recognition. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the overlooked become unforgettable. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.